Hello everyone. Today's case is another viewer request, and it is the unsolved disappearance of 16-year-old Karlie Guse, who would now be around 21 years old. I think some of the most important cases to cover are those of missing people because there is still a chance that they are out there somewhere and that they need saving. And talking about cases like these, especially after periods of time, I think are really good to do because it could spark someone's memory, it could lead to new leads, and hopefully at the end of the day, these people can be brought home alive. And that's what I hope can happen in Karlie's case if there is a chance that she is still out there. She went missing in 2018 and she is still missing till this very day. And I really hope after 5 years, something can happen, something can change in her case, because at this point, it really feels like there's not much. Well, let me take that back. There is a lot, but a lot of what I'm gonna say bullshit, because this case is so fucking confusing. I don't think I've covered a more confusing case. It was a nightmare to research, and from everyone else that I've seen that's covered this case, they've said something similar. And that is because there is not only so much drama in this case, there is so many different timelines. It is so hard to wrap anyone's head around what is the truth, because there are just so many different stories about what happened or what may have happened that it is just, it'll give you a headache. But at the end of the day, I wanted to do the best that I could to present you this case, because at the end of the day, Karlie is still missing. And despite all of the drama and all of the just confusing bullshit of this case, Karlie is still out there. Karlie has never been found. And despite all of the craziness and the confusion, I still wanted to cover this case because I think Karlie deserves it. So I did my best to comb through all of the information, and I'm going to present you with as much of this crazy information as I can, and hope this case can get some new eyes and some new ears, because I do think Karlie deserves to be found. So let's get into this. Karlie Lane Guse was born May 13th of 2002 to Zach Guse and Lindsay Fairley. I also seen that she had an older brother named Kait. She grew up in Bishop, California, but around the age of 2 years old, her parents ended up separating, and Karlie spent most of her time with her mother. A couple of years later, however, Zach ended up getting married to a woman named Melissa, and they'd end up branching off their own family tree and having 2 sons. The timeline seems to go that Karlie grew up with her mother in her early years. Lindsay would eventually move to Nevada, so when Karlie was around 5 years old, she would end up moving in with Zach, her stepmother Melissa, her older brother Kane, and then her 2 younger siblings. And they did this so that Karlie wasn't uprooted from her life and taken to Nevada. She was still able to stay in California with all the people she knew, her friends, stay in the school system, and it was just a better choice, they thought. But despite the distance, Karlie still had a great relationship with her mother, Lindsay. From there, the Guse family ended up moving to Chalfont Valley in California, which is a small desert community called the White Mountain Estates, and it's a fairly isolated area, as you can see from Google Maps. Other than the small group of homes, there's nothing other than that really but desert and mountains as far as you can see. But it is very close to Bishop, so Karlie could still attend Bishop Union High School, which is the school she was attending around the time of her disappearance. She seemed to have quite a few friends. She was also in a relationship with a guy named Donald. Karlie was also working as an assistant in training at Inyo Tile, which is the same company that her stepmother Melissa worked for. Now, everything anyone could say about Karlie seemed to be positive. She seemed to just be a really sweet kid. She was also said to be one of those people who was introverted, but once she warmed up to you and got to know you, she was a ball of fun. And I know these type of people very well because my husband is one of these people. They're usually really shy and quiet and more reserved when you first meet them. But once you get to know them, they are wild and they're so much fun to be friends with and to be around and to have around you. Karlie was also described as being caring, nurturing, and always made sure that people around her were happy. She was a great big sister. She loved animals. She also loved to dance and hang out with friends. Again, from all accounts, she seemed like a great young person. She was growing into being a great young adult. But she also seemed to still be a typical teenager, or what people call a typical teenager. So it didn't mean, despite all of her great characteristics, that she still wasn't trying to experiment like a lot of teenagers do. Sometime before Karlie's disappearance, her father and stepmother ended up finding out that she was smoking marijuana. And she ended up getting in trouble for this. I seen at one point, I think she was actually suspended from school for some period of time because she was caught smoking weed at school. Now, this confused me a bit because marijuana is legal in California, so I wasn't really sure why she would get in trouble for it, but I am concluding that she got in trouble for this because she was underage smoking marijuana. That would make the most sense, and I'm pretty sure that probably was the reason. It was said as well that around this time, her grades started slipping, and clearly it seemed like something was going on in Karlie's life. maybe she was just being a typical teenager. She was experimenting. She was 16. We have to keep that in mind. She seemed to want to spend a lot of time hanging out with friends. She seemed to, be telling some white lies. She was smoking weed. So is that the end of the world? No, I don't think she seemed like out of the ordinary at all. Just from those things, I wouldn't say something wild was going on. I was honestly a pretty lame teenager. I didn't do any of those things, but my brother, on the other hand, he probably did way worse than Karlie ever did. I will say that. He was always out partying and, hanging with friends and smoking and stuff. So I can understand people like that. And honestly, my brother turned out to be a great person. So I don't think partying and smoking and doing things like that will turn you into someone bad. And I don't think Karlie was turning into, a lost cause just because she was smoking weed and hanging out with friends. But things would take a turn in October of 2018. So as of this point in the story, things have seemed pretty solid. They seem to make sense. But on the night of October 12th into the morning of October 13th, some very confusing and strange events would take place. And this is where researching this case would turn into a disaster. So buckle up, because this is about to get very confusing. On October 12th of 2018, which is a Friday, Karlie ended up finishing up school, and then she would end up asking her father if she could attend the football game. Not seeing anything out of the ordinary with that. Karlie wanted to go hang out with friends and go to a football game. Her father ended up saying yes. But it turns out that Karlie apparently wasn't going to a football game, and instead she had lied to her father, and she was actually going to a quote-unquote party in Bishop with her boyfriend Donald and several friends. However, Donald has allegedly spoken out on social media and also told officials that this wasn't actually like a party, and from everything that I concluded, it doesn't seem like it was a party. It seemed more like a get-together with friends. It seems like they pretty much just went over to one of Donald's friends' houses to, hang out and smoke some weed. Again, doesn't seem like a big red flag to me. Now, earlier that evening, Melissa, Karlie's stepmother, had ended up taking her 2 young sons to trunk or treat. And the timeline seems to go that around 8 p.m. Melissa was out getting Taco Bell, and it stated that she had reached out to Karlie on her way home to ask if she was going to need a ride home from the football game. And Karlie ended up assuring Melissa that she was going to get a ride home from Donald. But sometime around or after that phone call happening, Karlie ended up smoking weed. And then very quickly after doing that, Karlie began to experience a very intense fear of people around her. And there's these other stories that apparently this wasn't the first time Karlie had had a bad reaction to smoking marijuana. But then there's also all these questions if she actually did smoke marijuana or she instead had been given spice. Now, if she had smoked spice, that is a whole different situation. Spice is actually synthetic marijuana, and according to the DEA, it can cause, and I quote, tachycardia, which is an elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure, unconsciousness, tremors, seizures, vomiting, hallucinations, agitation, anxiety, numbness, and tingling. Which if you're expecting to smoke marijuana and just expecting to experience, some relaxation, like that normal high marijuana can give you, experiencing all of those side effects instead could be very jarring. And I don't think you'd be prepared to experience those side effects when smoking weed. So this could lead to a possible very bad trip, heightening all these symptoms of anxiety and fear and stress because you don't know what is happening to your body and what is going on. Now, keep in mind that is just an assumption, because there are also theories that they were possibly doing LSD that night, and that's why all of these symptoms that we're eventually going to be talking about happened. But honestly, seeing this theory about the spice, you could be tricked into smoking it or not know what's going to happen to you when you are given it, and then all of these later things will happen that we're going to talk about. However, keep in mind that none of the other kids that were involved that night, that hung out at this house party thing that happened, that also smoked this marijuana, experienced any side effects, it seems like. So it seemed to have just happened to Karlie. Now, this has led to other theories, such as that Karlie did smoke marijuana, but then she experienced a psychosis from it, which many people that I've seen online that talked about this said they have also experienced the psychosis or have known someone that has experienced psychosis because of smoking weed, and say that what Karlie was experiencing sounded like psychosis. Now, I think the problem with this is, one, we don't know what actually happened that night, like what she specifically smoked or anything like that, or at least it's not released. I'm hoping the police would know or have figured this out, but it seems like a lot of the symptoms seem to bleed together. So like the symptoms from spice could mix in with the same symptoms as a psychosis break from smoking. So that's kind of the problem with this. This is where all this confusion starts. Now, I did want to dive into research of this. So the website dedicated to this topic online reads, and I quote, With an episode of psychosis, there can be feelings of paranoia or anxiety, and it's much more intense than that. A key feature of a psychotic episode is that the person is experiencing a disconnect with reality, which may feature hallucinations, as in seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, or tasting things that aren't there, or delusions, such as strong beliefs that aren't true, like that everyone is out to get them. In some cases, the person may become agitated, disoriented, or less coherent than they usually are, end quote. So what I want to know is how you all feel about this, especially after you will find out a little bit later in the case and the symptoms that Karlie was experiencing and showing. Because honestly, I think it could be any of the scenarios. But let's jump back into the timeline and the whole confusion of what was going on that evening. Now, I've heard it was 15 minutes later, but I've also seen it was 30 minutes later. By the way, after that first time Melissa contacted Karlie asking if she wanted to get picked up, Melissa ended up receiving a phone call from Karlie. And this time, Karlie was very upset and very in distress. According to Donald's timeline, him and Karlie were at his buddy's house, they smoked some weed, and then very soon after, Karlie started freaking out. And because she was so scared and freaking out and didn't want to be near anyone, he decided he was going to take her away from the party situation and ended up taking her back to his home. So the two of them started walking back, but at this point, Karlie was even scared of Donald. She allegedly, pushed him away and started screaming and running away from him, and this is when she ended up calling Melissa. Now, as far as I know, Donald has nothing to do with anything that happened, so don't take this as if she was scared of him because he was attacking or something. It seems more so whatever was happening to her mentally because of what she smoked or what they did, she was flipped out and she didn't want to be near anyone. She was scared of everything around her. But Donald was trying to help her out, take her away from the situation, make it better, and it wasn't working clearly. So she ended up running away from Donald, calling Melissa, and this was the last time that Donald ended up seeing Karlie. In an interview with Dr. Phil, Melissa would later say, and I quote, "When I'd first gotten into the driveway, the phone rang and I talked to her. She didn't want me to hang up the phone and she wanted me to come and get her immediately. And she said that she was at the back of the Highlands, which is a mobile home park. And I said, okay, I'm staying on the phone, and the phone call dropped because we live outside of town. And when I finally reconnected with her, she went from being behind the Highlands to a mile down the road running down Dixon Lane," end quote. Which Dixon Lane is another street off of the area, as you can see here on Google Maps. And it is literally just open desert. There's literally nothing around, so Karlie is running down this road in the middle of the night. Melissa then said, and I quote, "Karlie was physically running down the road with her cell phone, and that's how I found her because I could see the light on her phone. And then she got into my car and didn't want to get into the front seat. She just immediately got in the car and hopped in the seat behind me. She was scared. She didn't know what was wrong, and that's when she said she did smoke marijuana. And I said, by the way you're acting, you know it's not. It took me about 15 minutes to get her calmed down, but she just wanted to go home," end quote. Now, according to the Las Vegas Review-Journal, Karlie was pale as a ghost and her pupils were dilated, and it took Melissa so long to get her into the vehicle because she wasn't convinced who Melissa was or if Melissa was going to hurt her. Karlie was just freaking out. Now, in another whole different version of events that I seen that kind of bleeds into that version of events, Karlie had jumped right into the back seat when Melissa went to get her, and then on the way back, Karlie kept saying how she was worried that the vehicle or Melissa was going to kill her. It's also said that she moved seats several times, and then at one point, Karlie even grabbed the steering wheel, and then the vehicle almost veered off the road. So right off the bat, as you can see, the stories are very confusing and ever-changing, and there's this whole muddle of events that happens just in this little moment of time. Now, I did see that it said it took about 45 minutes for Melissa to return home from picking Karlie up on Dixon Lane. Normally, it's only about a 10 to 15 minute drive. However, in the one story, she did take about 15 minutes to get Karlie calmed down before she could get back home, so it could kind of work timing-wise. However, as I said, there's so many changing stories. I seen on one timeline that Karlie was picked up at 8:15 p.m. and they arrived home by 9 p.m. But then, as I said above, there's stories of Karlie calling Melissa at 8:30 p.m. So how is that possible that she was picked up at 8:15? It's just... there's so many different times, and it's really confusing. Either way, Karlie got picked up by Melissa. They drove home. Meanwhile, Karlie's father, Zach, would tell Dr. Phil that he wasn't really sure what was going on because he thought Karlie was just at a football game. But when Melissa and Karlie arrived home, it made a lot more sense to him. Zach had just gotten home a little earlier in the night, and he was actually drinking some beers and relaxing, and that's when his wife and daughter arrived home. At this point, Karlie was still acting very strange. For one moment, she was scared of her cell phone, she was scared of everything around her, she was scared of her parents, and then the next moment, she was telling them how much she loved them. Melissa then says that she ended up giving Karlie a salad and a power bar to help her sober up, which everyone thinks is kind of a strange combination of food to give someone who is high. But when Karlie ended up putting the lettuce in her mouth, she ended up spitting it out and saying, "This is the devil's lettuce." Melissa also claims that this happened that night.
Friday night, I picked up Karlie from town. She was supposed to be at a football game. She had lied to me and told me that she was at the football game. And when she called me, she said she was sorry. I was with friends. I'm sorry. Can you please just come get me? So I drove to town and picked her up. She was by herself. She was very paranoid. She was scared. When we got home, she was still paranoid, almost like extremely stoned. We got home, and then I had her eat. She had a salad. I made her eat a power bar, and she wanted me to spend the night with her. So, her brothers were awake, and Zach was awake, and we hung out, and she ate, and then she was like, "Can we go to bed?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, can you come sleep with me?" And I was like, "Yeah. Sure, why not? Whatever. I'll lay with you and watch a movie." We hung out for a little bit in the kitchen, talked a bunch, and then her brothers went to bed, and so then I went to bed with her, and then we got up. I had to go to the bathroom, brush my teeth, wash my face. She was by my side the whole time. She didn't want to leave my side. She was paranoid. We ended up back in the living room with her brothers for a little bit, watched a movie, and she was just still kind of paranoid. And then we went back to bed, and I spent the whole night with her. I mean, I was awake, and then I doze off, and she's just there. She was just hanging out. She was awake. She wanted to paint my toenails. She wanted to color. I was up, and then I would doze off, and I was up, and I would doze off, and she was there the whole time. I was really scared to put this out there, because so many people are judgmental.
Now, amongst all of this happening, Melissa made the decision to start recording Karlie. It turns out that she ended up taking her cell phone and putting on the video recording, but then sticking it in her pocket, so there's not really actually a video recording, it's more of an audio recording on video. And Melissa claims that she did this so that she could take this footage and show Karlie in the morning when she was sober how she acted on drugs. Now, the thing with these videos is they have never been released. The FBI seems to have them. Dr. Phil listened to one of them. There's apparently two of them. Karlie's mother ended up listening to this as well as her PI, which we'll later talk about. So a few people have heard these recordings, and it seems like everyone has a different opinion of what is on these recordings. But again, we don't have them, which really, in my opinion, sucks, because I think it would clear a lot of this confusion up. But apparently this whole thing with the devil's lettuce is on there, and a lot of other things we're going to be talking about. Now, once we go through all of this and I talk about the different theories, different scenarios, I want to keep these recordings in mind, because on one hand, I think, and a lot of professionals have said, it's great that these recordings happen because we can get a peek into that night. We can get a peek into Karlie's state of mind that night and what was happening. And it kind of is a proof of life that Karlie was still alive at certain points in time. On the other hand, it kind of gives me Letitia Stauch vibes. If you don't know about that case, Letitia Stauch ended up recording her stepson in a similar way where it's just audio, just within the time frame before he disappeared. But again, that's just my opinion. It just gives me vibes of other cases. I'm not saying that's true or it is the same whatsoever. It's just weird that there are parallels in certain cases. So at this point in the night, it was getting a little later, and this is when Melissa decided she was going to try to get Karlie to go to sleep. Melissa claims that she had decided to sleep in bed with Karlie because she was still scared and she wanted to be near her. Zach claims that he had drank quite a bit that night, so he was kind of in and out of sleep all night. He wasn't really dealing with Karlie at all. This was Melissa dealing with Karlie that night. And Melissa said that Karlie was up and down all night, and she was upset, paranoid, and distressed, and she seemed to not really be sleeping. Melissa also stated on Nancy Grace that night Karlie had went to bed wearing a t-shirt and underwear, and that's it. Melissa would also allegedly send texts to Karlie's boyfriend Donald at 1:27 a.m. telling him to pray for Karlie, which gave a lot of people some bad vibes. At 5:48 a.m., Melissa claims that she looked over at Karlie. She was laying there with her eyes opened, and then she ended up falling asleep. Now, this is where there are going to be a million more stories. I'm going to tell you this first one, but keep in mind, this is just one of many. According to Melissa's timeline, she woke up at 7:15 a.m. and she realized Karlie was no longer in bed with her. She claims that she got up and began looking around the house for Karlie, but she couldn't find her. The front door of the house was also said to be ajar. It wouldn't be until 9:35 a.m. that Zach would end up calling Lindsay and telling her, and I quote, "Karlie is gone," end quote, which made Lindsay immediately think that Karlie was dead. She then ended up telling Zach that they needed to call the police, and that is when Zach and Melissa would end up calling the police and telling them that they thought Karlie had ran away. But here's the thing with Karlie running away. Karlie had nothing on her when she allegedly left the house. Her cell phone was left behind, her glasses were left behind, her wallet was left behind. Karlie had no means to run away. Keep in mind, she's 16. What means does a 16-year-old have? She could have maybe ran to her boyfriend's house, but then again, I don't think her boyfriend lived anywhere near her. He lived, I think, over in Bishop, which isn't really in walking distance. But again, keep in mind, she may have been experiencing psychosis still at this point. She could have still been tripping out if it had been something other than psychosis. So could she have been making logical decisions? Maybe not. So at this point, the police are going into this looking for a juvenile runaway that's intoxicated. They aren't looking for someone that was kidnapped. They aren't looking for someone that had just went missing. Seems like they're looking for a drunk or high kid that decided to go run off somewhere, which doesn't really fit the profile of who Karlie was. But police ended up putting in their all, it seemed. They ended up canvassing the area. They searched the desert, bringing out all-terrain vehicles, helicopters, scent dogs, the works, but Karlie was never found. Now, if you heard in that clip I had played, Melissa claimed that Karlie had left the house wearing jeans, but then she would turn back on that statement when she was questioned about it and said that she only said that because that was what Karlie normally wore. But keep in mind, Karlie had went to bed wearing a t-shirt and underwear. And this is something that really concerns people because Melissa made this very strict claim that Karlie left the house wearing jeans, and what someone was last seen wearing when they went missing is very important. And lying about what you last seen them wearing is kind of a problem. And Melissa's been very, very heavily scrutinized because of this. It seems like she should have said, I last seen her wearing a t-shirt and underwear, but she possibly could have left wearing jeans because that's what she normally wore, but that's not what Melissa said. She said she left wearing, a shirt and jeans. And then you also have to keep in mind, if Karlie was so out of it mentally, would she have the wherewithal and the state of mind to, get out of bed and get fully dressed before she left the house to run off? Would she think to put on a full outfit to run off in October? And it seems like there's no certainty if she was wearing jeans or not, because Melissa says that Karlie had so many clothes, she doesn't know what she could have left the house wearing. So that's another really confusing point in the story. According to the FBI's website, Karlie was last seen wearing gray sweatpants or jeans and a white shirt, as well as Van brand shoes. So that's what the FBI seems to have settled on. And the gray sweatpants seem to have maybe been a possibility because it turns out that police say they have 3 witnesses. And I don't know if it's actually police. It seems like it's maybe Melissa that has these witnesses. It's kind of confusing about the witness thing as well. But there's apparently these 3 witnesses that claim to have seen Karlie that morning, and it didn't seem like she was wearing jeans. It seems like she was wearing gray sweatpants. The first witness is a man named Richard Eddy, who I think is former law enforcement, it said, and he was actually in his hot tub in his backyard in this glass enclosure. And he claims to have witnessed a girl matching Karlie's description walking by, and as she walked, she was waving a piece of paper. And I'll play for you a recording of him talking about this experience.
She was busy, and I don't quite understand the whole thing. I was in my hot tub room. It was probably about 6:30, 7 o'clock. This happened a couple years ago, so I'm just trying to guess at it. But I'd say between 6:30 and 7, and it was kind of chilly that morning, I remember. And for some reason, I looked out towards the street. I have big windows in the hot tub room. So I looked out towards the street, and I thought, that's unusual. There's a young girl walking by. She had kind of long brown hair. She had clothes on. She had a white, I can't even remember, but I think she had a white top and maybe gray bottoms or something. But she had clothes on, but it was kind of chilly, and I thought, that's kind of weird that she would be there. And she was waving a piece of paper, like a 12 by 12 piece of paper. She was just waving it in the air and walked by. Now, later that morning, I think it was about 8 o'clock maybe, I'm guessing probably, that her mother says, have you seen my daughter? And I told her the story that I had just seen a girl walk by, but I didn't know it was her. Oh, that was her. I think you were the last one to see her. I said, well, I don't know, but I'll help you go look. So at that time, I had a side-by-side motorcycle. So I rode up into the canyon, which is straight over from my house, because I figured maybe that's where she would go, because I have 2 chairs set up in that little canyon, and there's a little fire pit there, and I shoot my guns down into the canyon. And I went over there, and she wasn't there, and by the time I came back, she was at my driveway, and I told her I didn't see anything, and she says, well, thank you very much. And that's about the last I really heard of the whole thing.
Now, the second witness slash neighbor was actually a local teacher, but this local teacher wasn't one of Karlie's teachers, and she claims to have seen a very similar thing, a young girl waving a piece of paper on a white top and gray bottoms. Now, keep in mind, Melissa was very adamant that Karlie had left the house wearing blue skinny jeans, and Nancy Grace tore her apart for that. Now, the third witness, who is said to have been a wooder, and again, this witness is said to have been shaky, but this witness claimed to have seen a girl of the same description with the same outfit that looked like Karlie, but this time it was 7:30 a.m., and this girl was standing on the intersection of Highway 6 and where Karlie's neighborhood met on White Mountain Estate Road. As you can see with every other location I keep talking about, there is nothing out there. It is just pure desert. Also keep in mind with this timeline, 7:30 is around the time when Melissa realized that Karlie was missing. So if Karlie was over at that intersection and then Melissa went looking around for Karlie, how did she not find her? The question is, how did she manage to evade all the people looking for her? Now, keep in mind, the police weren't called till hours later, but how, if she was just walking and wandering, did people not find her? It was allegedly on foot, so how was she not found? Now, Karlie standing at this intersection has led to a big theory in this case, which is the theory that Karlie was picked up by the wrong person out there on Highway 6 and was kidnapped. It turns out that US Route 6 stretches all the way from California to Massachusetts, weaving through 14 other states by the way of Nevada, Nebraska, Indiana, and then New York. If Karlie was kidnapped out there, she could have been taken anywhere. However, if she was still experiencing this psychosis and she was scared of everything, she was scared of vehicles, why would she end up approaching a vehicle? And it said that she was standing behind a fence line at this intersection, so it's not like someone could have just snatched her from there, and if someone called her over, you think she would have ran away from them. So that theory is a little confusing as well. I did see, however, that Sun Dogs ended up tracking her from a bus stop where she usually got her bus to school to Highway 6 where the witness spotted Karlie. So what could that mean? Maybe she was picked up. As I said, the immediate theory at the time was that Karlie had left the house and was wandering around the desert somewhere in a state of psychosis, and that's how this case seemed to be treated. Days later, on October 20th of 2018, police would state that Karlie's disappearance did not meet the criteria for an Amber Alert, which we've seen happen in so many cases, and it really sucks because the criteria of an Amber Alert is actually pretty strict. You, I think, usually have to know a vehicle, like description and who they possibly may be with, like stuff like that. And if you have no vehicle description, because again, we don't know what happened to Karlie, no one's seen her get into a vehicle or anything, you can't do an Amber Alert. And I think there are other alert systems out there for other situations, but it doesn't seem to be as big as Amber Alert, and I think there needs to be, because maybe if Karlie was picked up by someone or wandered somewhere and there was a system that could tell everyone in mass alert of, you know, look out for the 16-year-old girl, maybe she could have been found faster, but there wasn't. And again, it wasn't until days later that this was said that it couldn't be done. Now, all of the parents in this, Zach, Lindsay, Melissa, they all ended up doing multiple interviews over the years talking about Karlie and trying to spread the word on her disappearance. Lindsay actually ended up speaking with Live PD, and I'll play the clip from that for you all.
But it's got to be by the grace of God.
What happened on the night that she disappeared?
Melissa picked her up from a party, and she came home, and she was really paranoid. They got home, got her settled in, and Melissa tried to console her, and the morning she was gone. Nobody heard her get out of bed. Nobody heard her go through a garage door. Nobody heard her go out the front door, but the front door was ajar.
Did Karlie take her cell phone with her?
No, she did not.
If Karlie is watching this tonight, what do you want to say to her?
Baby girl, there's nothing that you can't say to me or call out to me. Just, please, Karlie, I missed you. I love you. Just keep praying, baby. You're gonna come home.
Lindsay, we're going to do the best we can to get some answers.
Now, immediately after Lindsay was told that her daughter was missing, she ended up driving down to California, and she ended up being at Melissa and Zach's house that day. While at the Guse home, Lindsay's concerns grew because Melissa ended up telling her that she had recordings of her daughter. And Lindsay was allowed to listen to those recordings, as I said, and once she listened to these recordings, she started to question if Karlie had actually been abducted that night or if something else might have happened to her daughter. While Lindsay was at the home, Melissa ended up going on Facebook Live and immediately started trying to spread the word over Facebook. These lives that Melissa did have been heavily scrutinized by people because her story keeps changing in them.
Hours, and I'm putting this out there because it's going on 10 hours that she's been missing, and I want to put this on blast because I don't think she's out in the desert. I think that she could have been abducted or taken because we do live on a highway, and it happens, and I'm being real. And I just want to let everybody know, I want to put this on blast because I don't know what to do to consider her a missing person. She's 5'7", about 115 pounds. She has blue eyes and the cutest little nose and a great smile, and her hair goes all the way down past her, like to her belly, let's say, mid-waist. And this was last year's picture. Shows you she's a little bit different, but not much. She's still like adorably cute.
Now, Melissa chalks up her story changing and the details changing to being in shock. And she says she was just trying to get information out as fast as she could, and that's why there's inconsistencies. But all of this ended up making Melissa a person of interest to public opinion. Because after only 10 hours of Karlie being missing, Melissa was on Facebook Live telling people that she thought Karlie had been abducted or taken. And I want to say I personally feel kind of weird about the way that Melissa describes Karlie on these lives, and as we will later see on Dr. Phil, she keeps saying how pretty she is and, you know, how perfect she was. And it seems weird to say. I don't think if I had someone missing in my life, I would be like, oh, look how beautiful they were. Not really important at this moment how beautiful someone is if they are missing. You think you'd be talking about this is what they were wearing, you know, they have blue eyes, they have brown hair, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't be saying like, look how beautiful they were. But again, everyone acts differently to situations. When I watched them, it just gave me a weird vibe. But again, weird vibes aren't anything concrete. Now, speaking of those two videos that Melissa ended up filming of Karlie that night, when her and Zach were on Dr. Phil made a point to say that Melissa and Zach wouldn't let him listen to these videos. And he ended up pressing them about it, and they kind of played dumb saying, oh, no one asked us, but I don't think Dr. Phil's team wouldn't have asked for these videos. So in the end, after Dr. Phil pressing them about them a bunch, they ended up finally allowing Dr. Phil to listen to them, but only if he listened on headphones and no one else could listen. Again, I just wish that these videos were finally out there so that there was less speculation about these videos, and then we can kind of rule out, you know, if they're important or not, but we don't have them. So there's this whole controversy about Karlie asking Melissa to call 911 on these recordings. And that led to this huge theory that Karlie asked to call 911 because she was overdosing and Melissa refused to take her to the hospital. And it has a lot of people pissed off online. And this honestly kind of seems like the main theory that Lindsay has about her daughter as well. Lindsay's PI, Michael Boone, did say that these recordings are the last proof of life for Karlie, which her voice is heard at around 10:30 p.m. that night as Cool Runnings credits were rolling on TV. He also said that Karlie was doing what is called chirping in the recordings, which he said isn't caused by marijuana, but may be caused by other drugs. Michael also confirmed that Karlie did ask to call 911. However, when Dr. Phil listened to the recordings, he said that it was something more along the lines of the conversation going as Karlie said, would you call 911? Melissa then asked, what do you mean? And Karlie said, if I was dying or going to die. Melissa then said, you're not dying. Karlie said, if I was, would you call 911? And Melissa said, of course I would call 911, but you're not. Karlie said, if something was happening, would you call 911? Melissa said, of course I would. So who the hell knows at this point what actually the context of this conversation was in these recordings, because honestly, I could see that context shifting either way. And we'll get into some more theories a little bit later of what might have happened that night. Maybe she did think something was very wrong with her and Melissa was blowing it off. Allegedly, don't come for me, that's just a theory. On the other hand, maybe Karlie was completely fine. She just had something psychologically happening to her and Melissa was just trying to calm her down. I don't know. None of us do. Now, as I said 6 million times at this point in this video, take a shot every time I say this, you would be drunk, but there are so many changing stories in this case. And it's Melissa's changing stories that concern people. During Melissa's interview on Dr. Phil, of course, there were more differing stories. Melissa stated on Dr. Phil that she fell asleep with Karlie at 5:30 a.m. and then woke up at 7:30 a.m. and Karlie was gone. However, according to news articles that were placed around the time of Karlie's disappearance, things were stated like this, such as, and I quote, around 5:45 a.m., Melissa said she went through her normal routine of opening the kids' doors and saying good morning to them. She told Dateline she saw Karlie in her bed at that time. Melissa said she then went back to sleep for a little bit, but then she woke up a little bit later and opened Karlie's door again, and Karlie was nowhere to be found. She said, and I quote, I went back into the bedroom and I said to Zachary, honey, she's not here. And he said, what do you mean she's not here? Melissa said, I said she's gone. She's not in her room. She's not outside. She's not in the backyard. She's not anywhere, unquote. Now, right there, that makes no sense when compared to the other version of events, let alone the fact that In the one story, Melissa actually slept in bed with Karlie all night. In this story, she clearly wasn't in bed with Karlie because she said she went into Karlie's room and she was there and then she wasn't there. On top of that, let's keep in mind that this was a Saturday morning, so why were you waking your young children up? I think they were like 9 years old or younger. Like they're young kids. Why would you wake them up at 5:45 in the morning to get them ready for school or to get them ready for anything? And then she went back to bed. So that doesn't make any sense. Why would you wake all your children up and then you go back to sleep when it was a Saturday morning? It just doesn't make sense why you get everyone up so early and then go back to bed and then wake up and everyone, like, she's gone. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. Again, I also seen this other version where she said she was getting the kids ready for school, but why would you get the kids ready for school on a Saturday morning? On Dr. Phil, Lindsay also said that Melissa said she had woken her children up at such an early hour on Saturday morning and then Melissa took them to her brother's home. Why would Lindsay say this for no reason? One hand. Also, why would Melissa ended up getting her kids up at 5 in the morning to take them to her brother's home? It doesn't make sense. Why would there be a situation that early in the morning that you need to get your kids out of the house if in the other timeline, that's when she fell asleep and Karlie was still there? So it doesn't make sense. What is the true story? There's another issue with details regarding Karlie's cell phone. According to Donald, when he went to the home that day when Karlie disappeared, he ended up seeing her cell phone in her bedroom on her nightstand. But then according to Melissa, she insists that the cell phone was left on the counter at night and it was on the counter. So I don't know. Then there's this other issue that people have with Melissa about getting her car detailed. Sometime after Karlie's disappearance, Melissa went and detailed her vehicle and then was driving a rental vehicle. Her reasoning for this was that her car got damaged while searching the desert for Karlie because of boulders. But this made people very suspicious that you go get your car detailed after your stepdaughter goes missing. Again, we have two differing opinions on these video recordings and what was said in the context of these videos. We also have multiple different timelines. We have details about hours before Karlie went missing that make no sense. We have zero evidence of what might have actually happened to Karlie. We also have parents that both have two differing ideas of what happened to their daughter. We have Zach and Melissa saying that she ran away. We have Lindsay thinking that Karlie died that night and they covered it up. This case is one giant fucking mess. But at the end of the day, Karlie is still missing. This case is so crazy that at one point people thought Karlie had been abducted and then forced to make ASMR eating videos on a YouTube channel called Kait. But that's been completely ruled out by the police. I went and watched these videos and I don't know how people ever even thought they were Karlie because the person's mouth doesn't even look like Karlie in my opinion. She doesn't seem to resemble Karlie, so I don't know why people ever thought that, but as I said, the theories in this case are wild. This whole story is wild. There was another controversy with another YouTuber that ended up using Karlie's disappearance as clickbait to get views by saying he'd found her, but he really hadn't, which was in very poor taste in my opinion and a lot of other people's opinions. On top of all of that craziness, in recent years, Zach was actually arrested for a DV incident against Melissa in 2021. Now, I couldn't find that much information on his charge, but I think it was just a very interesting turn of events. And I think it really made more people look into Zach and Melissa even more. If he's capable of being charged with a DV incident against Melissa, what else was going on in that home? And there seems to be a lot more because Lindsay ended up going on a phone interview with a channel called No Thanks Investigates, and she had a lot to spill. Lindsay ended up going on to say that she's no longer in contact with her older son because of her suspicion against his father. She also said that Zach tried to hire an attorney to silence her. She claimed to have known Zach since high school and said that he was a meth head in high school. She made claims that he had a party mentality but was a hard worker, yet on the same hand didn't spend much time with his children, such as going to their school events. She claims that they divorced because he wanted to be a swinger and she was not into that lifestyle. Lindsay also claims that Melissa has a very much Dr. Jekyll and Miss Hyde personality and that she never knew what she was going to be greeted with when she went to go pick Karlie up, basically saying that Melissa was very hot and cold. Lindsay also made claims that Zach was always very busy and working, so Melissa was always the one that she had to interact with when she picked Karlie up. I've also read accounts online from different Facebook group owners on Karlie's case says that Melissa will block anyone who says something against her, and then she'll go on to these Facebook groups and, you know, be part of these communities, but as soon as anyone asks her a question she doesn't like, she'll leave. When the DV report against Melissa was brought up, Lindsay confirmed that Zach was very violent when he drank and that he had gotten very physical in the past. She said that one time Zach slammed his head through the drywall of their mobile home. Lindsay also claimed that her oldest son had once called her saying that his father had hit him over the head. So we have the theory of Karlie being abducted off Highway 6, and then we also have this theory of her wandering off into the desert because of psychosis. So after hearing all of that, I do want to mention another theory that people online have and seem to be focused on, and it kind of entangles with what Lindsay thinks. And that is the possibility of foul play by Melissa, Zach, or both of them. And there's also, again, multiple different theories on this as well. I also want you to keep in mind that these are just theories. They're just people's opinions. They're not facts. Clearly, there's no evidence at this time of anything either way. But it is said that liars do place pieces of truth in their lies to keep their stories straight. And there seems to be 6 million stories going on here, so what could be the truth? So this one theory alleges that Melissa's story keeps changing because she's actually responsible for Karlie's disappearance and or death, allegedly. This theory goes that Zach wasn't the only one drunk that night, but Melissa was as well, and that when Melissa went to go pick up Karlie on that dark desert road that night, she ended up hitting Karlie with her vehicle because it was so dark out there. Melissa had mentioned how dark it was out there and how she had only seen Karlie's cell phone light. Now, the theory is that Melissa didn't hit Karlie hard enough to kill her, obviously, but that she was injured to some degree or she had hit her head. So Melissa went, picked Karlie up and put her in her back seat, which is why Karlie was in the back seat and not sitting in the front seat like a normal person would. And this would also give a reasoning if scent dogs or anything smelled the vehicle, why Karlie may have, been in the back seat. And that's why in these changing stories, she said Karlie jumped in the back seat. From there, Melissa ended up taking Karlie home and doing those video recordings to try to do like a proof of life, like Karlie's alive, she's fine. But that's why people are leaning that these video recordings, something happened to Karlie and she needed to go to the hospital because that's why she's asking for 911, because she's actually injured to some degree. She has a head injury or something, and that's why she's so confused and disoriented even more so and asking all these crazy things about calling 911. Because she knows that something's wrong with her, but Melissa doesn't take her to the hospital. The theory goes on to allege then that Melissa eventually put Karlie to bed, which is what you're not supposed to do with a head injury, and from there, Karlie ended up dying. At 5:30 a.m., Melissa realized what had happened, that Karlie had died. This is when she woke her children up, took them over to her brothers so they weren't witnesses. And from there, Karlie's body was disposed of somewhere, and later, Melissa got her vehicle detailed in case there was any evidence in it. Now remember, this is just a theory I read online. But I mean, during researching all this case, I was wondering why people would suspect that these parents would be involved because I couldn't really think of a reasoning why. But as I dove deeper and deeper, and all these stories kept changing and things seemed so confusing, it started to wave me in different ways that maybe there is a possibility and something like this could be a reason to why the parents would keep changing their stories. And these changing stories are the biggest contention, I think, in this case. Why do the stories keep changing? It doesn't make sense that they would change so much. Lindsay also stated on Dr. Phil that she believed that the witnesses that Melissa claimed to have are shaky. There's people that believe that it wasn't actually Karlie wandering around that morning, but Melissa wandering around impersonating Karlie so that there was witnesses. There's also questions that people have on a theory that Melissa didn't actually hit Karlie that night, but that when they were driving home and Karlie grabbed the steering wheel, Karlie clearly wasn't wearing a seatbelt because she was said to have been changing seats and moving around in the car because of the psychosis or the drugs or whatever. And that when she grabbed the steering wheel and they swerved, she ended up hitting her head on the dashboard and getting a head injury that way, which that sounds a little more realistic to me than, Melissa just being drunk and driving into her or something. And when Karlie grabbed that steering wheel, hit her head on the dashboard, this is when she got the head injury. Even if there wasn't this foul play aspect of, them injuring her or whatever, and she hit her head, they didn't realize the severity of her head injury. They brought her home and put her to bed. She ended up dying because of this head injury. They felt like they would get in trouble and then they hid the body. That's another theory that I've seen where they are kind of liable, but not liable, but still covered it up for some reason. Now, if you take into account what Lindsay said during that phone interview, there's also the possibility of another alleged situation. The situation where Karlie was brought home freaking out after having that psychosis break or, doing whatever drugs she was given and freaking out. And this is when Zach snapped because he was drunk. According to Lindsay and now court records, Zach has a history of DV, and there's also claims of him from Lindsay hitting their children. She also made a point to say that he has claimed that he blacks out when he drinks, possibly. And we do know for a fact that that night when Karlie came home, Zach had been drinking. So is there a possibility that Zach, for whatever reason, snapped, he hit Karlie in the head, maybe she fell and hit her head, or whatever ended up happening, And then she ended up dying later that night when they put her to bed from a head injury or something like that. And then Melissa and Zach ended up covering it up because Zach would have been liable for what happened, and that is why they're lying. That's why their stories keep changing. Honestly, I think the car thing or Zach snapping may be the most possible situations in this if there is foul play involved. But again, just the theory. There's also Lindsay's theory that she has spoken about quite a bit, where her daughter died of a drug overdose that night, and then the two covered it up. Lindsay says that she listened to that recording Melissa made, and her daughter was asking to call 911 and to go to the hospital, and that never happened. So they would be liable, or think they may be liable. There's also the fact that Melissa claims early in that morning to have looked over when she was laying in bed with Karlie and her eyes were wide open. And this is when Lindsay thinks that Melissa had realized her daughter had died. Now, this is substantiated by Melissa and Zach's conversation with Dr. Phil. Now, after Dr. Phil had listened to that recording, he said, and I quote, "What it tells me was that this was a mind-altering drug. Someone had laced that marijuana. This wasn't just a meth head talking. There was more to it than that." End quote. However, he does go on to say that it would make perfect sense if she was in that state of mind from drugs that she may flee, but take Dr. Phil's words lightly because he has a lot of controversies about him as well. Now, Lindsay also had a lot more things that she said on Dr. Phil that I wanted to speak of. She said at one point on Dr. Phil that when she was at Melissa and Zach's home, Melissa was looking at a map that she had put on her wall of the area that had marked different locations that police had already searched, and that Melissa allegedly said, and I quote, "They're going in the wrong direction," end quote, which how would Melissa know that if she didn't know where Karlie was? I also want to say on the Dr. Phil show, again, Melissa pointed out when they were showing Karlie's pictures how beautiful she was by saying, and I quote, "She's so beautiful," end quote. That's the only thing Melissa pretty much said when they were showing the photos. And again, it reminds me of those Facebook Live videos where she kept saying how beautiful and how pretty Karlie was. Like, why do you need to keep bringing up how beautiful she is? It's just weird to me. I don't know. Like, why is that the most important thing to say at this moment? I don't think it is. There's also another really strange story that Lindsay points out where Melissa says that she woke up and discovered Karlie was missing at 7:15 a.m. But then there's another story where she called Zach at 7:30 a.m. saying that Karlie was missing. But why would she need to call him if she was home? And then in another story, Melissa said she was out looking for Karlie. And then when she couldn't find her, she went home to wake Zach up. And I'm just so damn confused because there's so many different stories. Like, why would you call him if you're supposed to be home, but then you're out and then you're home? It's just so confusing. During Lindsay's phone interview with No Thanks Investigates, she also said that she believes Karlie never left that house that morning, and that, again, she doesn't believe the witnesses saw Karlie that morning, but again, saw Melissa. One last thing I wanted to say about those video recordings, Lindsay said she wants to release the video recordings because she said she has a copy of the recordings, but it seems that the police don't want her to because it's an active investigation, and at this point in time, I don't think they're released, so clearly there's something holding her back from releasing them. There was also this other thing I seen last second about these recordings where Lindsay said that in the recordings, Melissa ended up asking Karlie how the football game was, and Karlie said it was good. She didn't deny going to the football game in the recording, so why is there the story that Karlie had lied and gone to this party? If in these recordings, it seems that Melissa's still on this assumption that Karlie went to the football game. When did Melissa find out that Karlie was lying? I'm so confused by that. It seems that in the recording, she was unaware that the party happened and she still thought the football game happened, but then she later goes on to say that she found out when Karlie was picked up that she wasn't at the game. It's so confusing. There's also what I find as strange videos on the FBI's website page for Karlie going missing called the Things They Carry video series. And it's these videos of the families of witnesses. Lindsay seems to not be involved in it at all. There's a video of Karlie's little brother that I found a little strange that's titled Karlie Guse, She's Probably Dead, which I found a weird title to have on a video of a child speaking about his missing sister. I also find it weird that they put a video of the little brother talking about this, to have such a young kid talking about his sister possibly being dead.
It's like my body's telling me that she's still here, but we have absolutely no clue in the right mind where. I mean, like a handful of me is just feeling that, and then the rest of my body's just feeling good parts. So the bad part would be like she's getting abused, or I don't know. She's probably sitting in a dark room in a chair, tied up, just sitting there, dying of hunger, thirst, and light, and probably dead.
Zach also is in multiple of these videos, and he says he has two theories: that either Karlie crossed the desert far enough that no one found her, which I find a very big improbability, but it's either that or she was abducted. Those are his theories. So where does that leave us? Honestly, I don't know. This case is a mess. In my opinion, there's way too many changing stories and way too many possibilities, and there's no evidence at all, it seems like. And usually, 99.9% of the time, I do not want to point my finger at parents in these videos. And I usually try to play devil's advocate as much as I can, and I don't want to sway anyone to thinking that parents may be involved in their children being missing, because again, everyone reacts differently. But in this case, it's so hard for me because there just seems to be so many changing stories from the people involved, and not one piece of evidence seems to be consistent. In my opinion, there's too many changing stories and anything seems possible. This case reminds me of a lot of other cases where there's no answers, such as the Summer Wells case. And I did mention Letitia Stout earlier. It's super, super strange, and I just wish that there was some kind of solid evidence or answers for Karlie. Because at the end of the day, Karlie deserves justice if there is justice needed, or she needs to be found. She needs to be put to rest if she is no longer alive. We just need some kind of comfort because Lindsay and Zach as well, if he is not involved, need answers. Where is Karlie and what happened to her? I want to know. Her mother wants to know. And again, if Zach and Melissa are not involved, they also would want to know. This is a case that I really do hope gets solved and doesn't go cold for the future. So if you do have any answers, I do urge you to contact the authorities or the FBI. I'll have their information linked down below. I honestly think it's very important to spread the word on this case and cases like these. It's not as well known as it should be. So whether you do want to share this video that I created or any other content creators' videos or content on this case, I urge you to do so. Please spread the word. Hopefully we can figure out what happened to Karlie and where she is. Karlie would be around 21 years old, and today's time, she has blue eyes. She was 5'7" and around 110 pounds at the time of her disappearance. This is Karlie, and I really do hope we can get answers for her. So with that, how do you all feel about this case? Are you as confused? Again, I urge you to share this video and share any other content on Karlie, so hopefully we can get some answers. With that, I am going to let you all go for now. If you're not subscribed to my channel, I definitely recommend you do so. I do create weekly true crime videos, and subscribing allows me to continue to create content like this, spread the word on cases like this, and allows me to spend more time on videos. With that, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.